When my parents showed up to my wedding dressed entirely in black, I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe it was just their style. Maybe I was overthinking it. But as I walked down the aisle and saw them sitting there, unsmiling, rigid, almost mourning, I realized this wasn't just disapproval. It was a statement. What I didn't know was that my husband had uncovered something weeks earlier. Something they never expected anyone to hear. And when he pressed play during the reception, the room went silent. Some weddings begin with joy. Mine began with a warning and ended with the truth. I woke up before the sun, long before my alarm, staring at the ceiling of the hotel suite that was supposed to feel magical. For a moment, I just listened. The hum of the air conditioner, a car door slamming somewhere below, my maid of honor breathing softly on the pull-out couch. It was quiet in that fragile, suspended way mornings sometimes are, like the world hasn't fully decided what it's going to be yet. I pressed my hand against my chest. My heart was steady, not racing, not panicked, just heavy. I told myself it was normal. Brides are emotional. Brides are overwhelmed. Brides don't sleep the night before their wedding. Still, there was something sitting beneath the surface that I couldn't name. By 9 o'clock, the suite was alive. Hairspray hung in the air. Curling irons clicked and hissed. Someone had turned on soft music. My makeup artist kept telling me how calm I seemed. "You're the most relaxed bride I've seen all year," she said with a smile. I smiled back, but it felt like I was watching myself from a distance. Around 11, I checked my phone. A text from my mother, sent an hour earlier. "We're on our way." No heart. No exclamation mark. Just that. I stared at it longer than I needed to. My parents had always been reserved people. Formal. Controlled. Emotions were something you displayed carefully, like fine china. But even so, I'd hoped today might soften something. By the time the limo pulled up to the venue, guests were already arriving. I could see them through the tinted window. Women in pale blue dresses, soft pink shawls, light gray suits. It was a spring wedding, outdoors, under a wide white canopy draped in flowers. It looked exactly the way I'd imagined it. As I stepped out, careful not to trip on my dress, I heard someone behind me whisper, "She looks beautiful." I felt it then, a flicker of joy. Then I saw their car. My parents always drove separately from everyone else, even when it wasn't necessary. My father stepped out first. Dark suit. Crisp. Severe. Black. I frowned slightly. Maybe it was navy. Maybe it was the lighting. Then my mother stepped out. Black dress. Long sleeves. Simple. No color. No corsage. No softening detail. Not navy. Black. I felt something cold move through me. For a second, I told myself I was overreacting. Black is elegant. Black is formal. Black is classic. But not to your daughter's wedding. A few guests noticed too. I could tell by the subtle pause in conversation. The way eyes followed them. The way no one quite knew what to say as they approached. My mother's lips curved into a polite, restrained smile when she reached me. "You look prepared," she said. Prepared. Not beautiful. Not radiant. Not happy. Prepared. My father gave me a brief hug. His hands barely touched my back. "It's not too late to rethink things," he murmured quietly enough that only I could hear. I stepped back, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "What?" He straightened his jacket. "Just making sure you're certain." "Certain." I looked at them standing there in black, like they were attending something else entirely. And for the first time that day, it stopped feeling like a wedding. It felt like a warning. When my parents showed up to my wedding dressed entirely in black, I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe it was just their style. Maybe I was overthinking it. But as I walked down the aisle and saw them sitting there, unsmiling, rigid, almost mourning, I realized this wasn't just disapproval. It was a statement. What I didn't know was that my husband had uncovered something weeks earlier. Something they never expected anyone to hear. And when he pressed play during the reception, the room went silent. Some weddings begin with joy. Mine began with a warning and ended with the truth. I woke up before the sun, long before my alarm, staring at the ceiling of the hotel suite that was supposed to feel magical. For a moment, I just listened. The hum of the air conditioner, a car door slamming somewhere below, my maid of honor breathing softly on the pull-out couch. It was quiet in that fragile, suspended way mornings sometimes are, like the world hasn't fully decided what it's going to be yet. I pressed my hand against my chest. My heart was steady, not racing, not panicked, just heavy. I told myself it was normal. Brides are emotional. Brides are overwhelmed. Brides don't sleep the night before their wedding. Still, there was something sitting beneath the surface that I couldn't name. By 9 o'clock, the suite was alive. Hairspray hung in the air. Curling irons clicked and hissed. Someone had turned on soft music. My makeup artist kept telling me how calm I seemed. "You're the most relaxed bride I've seen all year," she said with a smile. I smiled back, but it felt like I was watching myself from a distance. Around 11, I checked my phone. A text from my mother, sent an hour earlier. "We're on our way." No heart, no exclamation mark. Just that. I stared at it longer than I needed to. My parents had always been reserved people. Formal. Controlled. Emotions were something you displayed carefully, like fine china. But even so, I'd hoped today might soften something. By the time the limo pulled up to the venue, guests were already arriving. I could see them through the tinted window. Women in pale blue dresses, soft pink shawls, light gray suits. It was a spring wedding, outdoors, under a wide white canopy draped in flowers. It looked exactly the way I'd imagined it. As I stepped out, careful not to trip on my dress, I heard someone behind me whisper, "She looks beautiful." I felt it then. A flicker of joy. Then I saw their car. My parents always drove separately from everyone else, even when it wasn't necessary. My father stepped out first. Dark suit. Crisp. Severe. Black. I frowned slightly. Maybe it was navy. Maybe it was the lighting. Then my mother stepped out. Black dress. Long sleeves. Simple. No color. No corsage. No softening detail. Not navy. Black. I felt something cold move through me. For a second, I told myself I was overreacting. Black is elegant. Black is formal. Black is classic. But not to your daughter's wedding. A few guests noticed too. I could tell by the subtle pause in conversation. The way eyes followed them. The way no one quite knew what to say as they approached. My mother's lips curved into a polite, restrained smile when she reached me. "You look prepared," she said. Prepared. Not beautiful. Not radiant. Not happy. Prepared. My father gave me a brief hug. His hands barely touched my back. "It's not too late to rethink things," he murmured quietly enough that only I could hear. I stepped back, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "What?" He straightened his jacket. "Just making sure you're certain." "Certain." I looked at them standing there in black, like they were attending something else entirely. And for the first time that day, it stopped feeling like a wedding. It felt like a warning. 3 days before the wedding, my mother came over unannounced. I was in the middle of finalizing seating arrangements at the kitchen table, papers spread everywhere, highlighter uncapped, coffee going cold beside me. When the doorbell rang, I remember thinking it was a delivery. It wasn't. She stood there holding a small white envelope. "I won't stay long," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She looked around my apartment like she was inspecting it, like she expected to find evidence of something: chaos, maybe, regret. I tried to keep my voice light. "Everything okay?" She handed me the envelope. Inside was a check. A large one. "In case you decide to make a different choice," she said calmly. My stomach dropped. A different choice? She sat down at the table across from me and folded her hands. "It's not too late to rethink things." Weddings are emotional. People get swept up. I'm not swept up, I said, more sharply than I intended. She sighed. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just disappointed. I'm your mother. I see things you don't. What exactly do you see? A future where you struggle more than you have to. There it was again. The implication that Daniel wasn't enough. That I was stepping down instead of stepping forward. You don't even know him, I said quietly. I know patterns, she replied. That conversation ended the way most of ours did, without resolution. She left the check on the table. I tore it in half after she walked out. The next evening, my father called. Can we talk? He asked. His tone was measured, almost businesslike. We met in the driveway outside my building. He didn't come inside. I'm not here to argue, he said. I just want to make sure you're certain. I am. He nodded slowly. Marriage is permanent. Feelings aren't. I felt my jaw tighten. You've been married 38 years. That's different.
How?
He didn't answer that. Instead, he said something that lingered longer than the rest. If something were to come to light after the wedding, it would be harder. Public embarrassment isn't easy to recover from. I stared at him. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing specific, he said quickly. Just think carefully. He drove away before I could push further. That night, I told Daniel everything. We were sitting on the couch, half-packed suitcases by the door, wedding timeline taped to the fridge. He listened without interrupting, the way he always did. They're trying to scare you, he said finally. I know.
But why?
They've never gone this far. He leaned back, thinking. Not defensive. Not angry. Just thoughtful. Do you trust me? He asked gently. With my whole life. Then, that's enough. I studied his face. There was something steady there. Solid. But also something else, resolve. You're not worried they'll do something? I asked. He paused just long enough for me to notice. If they try, he said, we'll handle it. The way he said it wasn't casual. It wasn't dismissive. It was prepared. I didn't ask what he meant. Maybe I didn't want to know. On the morning of the wedding, when I saw my parents dressed in black, those conversations replayed in my head like unfinished sentences. It wasn't just disapproval. It was intention. By the time the music started, I had practiced my smile so many times it felt almost real. The string quartet began the processional, soft, measured notes floating through the warm afternoon air. The canopy of white fabric above the aisle moved gently in the breeze, sunlight filtering through like something out of a magazine spread. This was supposed to be the moment I'd replay for the rest of my life. Instead, my eyes were searching. I stood at the top of the aisle with my bouquet trembling slightly in my hands. My maid of honor squeezed my elbow. You okay? She whispered. Yes. I lied, because it was easier than explaining the weight pressing against my ribs. The doors opened wider. And there they were. Front row. Center. Black against a sea of spring colors. My father sat perfectly upright, hands folded over one knee. My mother's posture was rigid, chin lifted slightly, her expression unreadable. Not angry. Not sad. Just distant. Like observers. Like witnesses to something they didn't approve of. The first few steps down the aisle felt mechanical. Heel. Breathe. Smile. Repeat. Guests stood on either side, soft faces, teary eyes, phones discreetly lifted. I caught snippets of warmth. She looks beautiful. Oh, she's glowing. Then I passed my parents. My mother didn't reach for my hand. She didn't adjust my veil. She didn't whisper anything reassuring. She just looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Not grief. Judgment. I kept walking. Daniel was waiting at the end of the aisle, sunlight catching in his hair, eyes fixed only on me. When he saw my expression falter for half a second, his brows knit together with concern. I reached him, and he took my hands. They were warm. Steady. You're here, he said softly, almost to himself. Of course I am, I replied, though my voice didn't sound like mine. The officiant began speaking about commitment, about partnership, about building something lasting. His voice drifted in and out of focus as my awareness kept tugging toward the front row. My father's jaw was tight. My mother wasn't smiling. When it came time for vows, Daniel went first. He didn't read from a card. He just looked at me. I choose you, he said, voice firm but gentle. Not because you're perfect. Not because it's easy. I choose you because you're honest, and because you're brave enough to build a life that reflects who you actually are. My throat tightened. Brave enough. When it was my turn, my hands shook slightly. I became hyper-aware of everything. The breeze lifting my veil, the sound of someone shifting in their seat, the faint rustle of fabric from the front row. I choose you, I said, because you see me clearly, and you don't try to reshape me. I didn't mean for it to sound pointed,
But it was.
the officiant pronounced us husband and wife. Applause rose around us, warm, enthusiastic, genuine. Everyone stood. Everyone clapped. Except my parents. They remained seated for a beat too long. My father's hands stayed still. My mother's expression didn't change. It was subtle, but it was loud. Daniel felt it too. I knew he did, because his grip on my hand tightened just slightly before he leaned in to kiss me. The kiss was real,
Steady.
grounding. For a moment, everything else faded. But as we turned to walk back down the aisle together, married, I couldn't shake the feeling that something hadn't ended. It had only begun. The reception hall was glowing when we walked in. Soft amber lights, white linens, glassware catching reflections like scattered stars. The DJ eased into something warm and familiar, and for a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Almost. Daniel kept his hand at the small of my back as we moved from table to table, thanking people for coming. My college roommate hugged me so tightly, I nearly cried. My aunt told me she'd never seen me look happier. I held on to those words like something solid. But across the room, in the far corner near the window, my parents sat alone. They hadn't mingled. They hadn't joined cocktail hour. They hadn't even approached Daniel's family, who were doing their best to radiate friendliness in every direction. My mother sat straight-backed, hands folded in her lap. My father stared into his untouched drink, black against gold. I tried to ignore it. Halfway through dinner, my cousin leaned over and whispered, "Is everything okay with your parents?" I forced a smile. "They're just formal." She nodded politely, but her eyes said she didn't believe me. When Daniel got pulled away for photos with his college friends, I decided to walk over. Each step toward their table felt heavier than the last. "Are you enjoying yourselves?" I asked, standing there in my white dress like a guest at my own wedding. My mother looked up at me calmly. "It's certainly memorable." "That's not what I asked." She gave me a thin smile. "We're here, aren't we?" My father finally spoke. "You still have time to reconsider certain things." I blinked. "We're already married." He shrugged slightly. "Annulments exist." The words hit harder than I expected. I glanced around quickly, making sure no one had overheard. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. "Doing what?" my mother asked lightly. "We're simply concerned." "Concerned about what?" She leaned back slightly, eyes cool. "About what happens when reality settles in." I felt something shift inside me then. Not fear, not embarrassment. Anger. "Daniel is not a mistake," I said, my voice lower now. My father's jaw tightened. "We'll see." Before I could respond, the DJ tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting speeches in just a few minutes." Relief flickered through me. Speeches meant structure. Tradition. Something predictable. I looked at my father. "Are you ready?" He stared at me blankly. "I won't be speaking." My stomach dropped. "Dad, it's just a few words." I don't feel comfortable endorsing something I have reservations about. The sentence was quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. I stood there for a moment, feeling like I was 15 again, being told I'd made a poor choice in electives. Daniel appeared beside me then, sliding his hand into mine. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. I hesitated. My mother looked at him directly. "We're just having an honest conversation." Daniel's expression didn't harden. It didn't falter. He just studied them calmly, taking something in. "Honesty is important," he said evenly. My father held his gaze for a long second. "Yes," he replied. "It is." There was something in the air then. Not loud, not explosive, but loaded. Daniel squeezed my hand once, subtle, reassuring. "Why don't you go sit down?" he said quietly to me. "I need to speak with the DJ for a moment." I looked up at him, confused.
About what?
He gave me a small, steady smile. "Just something important." And as he walked away, I felt it again. That same sensation I'd had earlier. Like we were standing at the edge of something I couldn't yet see. I watched Daniel cross the room toward the DJ booth, moving with an ease that didn't match the tension sitting in my chest. The DJ leaned in to hear him over the music. Daniel said something brief.
Calm.
Intentional. The DJ's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he nodded. I felt my pulse quicken. This wasn't on the timeline. The maid of honor speech was supposed to be first, then Daniel's best friend. Then, if my father had agreed, him. Instead, the music lowered gradually. Silverware clinked against plates. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Daniel took the microphone. He didn't clear his throat dramatically. He didn't tap it or joke about testing it. He just stood there. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice steady and warm. "It means more than you know." A few people smiled. Someone raised a glass. He glanced at me briefly, and there was something in his eyes. Gentle, but resolved. "I know weddings are about celebration," he continued. "And that's exactly what today is. But they're also about honesty. About stepping into a life with clarity." The room shifted slightly. Not alarmed, just attentive. I felt my shoulders tighten. Daniel continued, "Before we move forward tonight, there's something that deserves to be addressed." My mother's posture changed almost imperceptibly. Her back straightened. My father's hand tightened around his glass. A low hum of curiosity moved through the guests. I stepped closer to the head table, unsure whether I should interrupt. Part of me wanted to grab his arm and whisper, "Not now." But another part, the part that had been bracing for something all day, stayed still. Daniel's voice didn't waver. "A few weeks ago, I became aware of conversations that concerned not just me, but my wife. Conversations about what today represents." The word wife grounded me for half a second. He gestured gently toward the DJ booth. "I believe when something is said about you, especially something serious, you deserve to hear it directly." In context, my stomach dropped. Across the room, my mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father leaned forward slightly. "Daniel," I called quietly, barely audible beyond our table.
He looked at me.
There was no anger in his face. No drama. Just quiet conviction. "I would never embarrass you," he said softly into the microphone, but the words were meant for me. Then he nodded once toward the DJ. A beat of silence. The room held its breath. The faint click of a button echoed through the speakers. And for the first time that day, I understood that whatever was about to happen had been waiting longer than I realized. The first thing I heard was the clink of porcelain, a cup being set down on a saucer. Then my mother's voice.
Clear.
Recognizable. Calm in the way she always was when she believed she was being reasonable. "I'm telling you, if we don't step in now, she'll regret this for the rest of her life." The room froze. I felt every muscle in my body go still. My father's voice followed. Lower. Measured. "We can't just object at the ceremony. That would look dramatic." A faint rustle in the background, like fabric shifting. the hum of what sounded like a cafe. My mother again. Then we make sure certain information comes out. People deserve to know who they're applauding. A soft murmur rippled through the reception hall. My ears rang. That teacher persona, she continued. It's charming. But stability isn't charm. And if she hears certain things publicly, she'll have no choice but to reconsider. My father exhaled sharply. Humiliation is unpleasant. So is divorce, my mother replied. Better embarrassed now than trapped later. I couldn't breathe. I remembered that cafe. The way my father had stirred his coffee. The way my mother had looked at me in my kitchen. Daniel's voice was absent from the recording. Only theirs. Planning. Strategizing. We can frame it as concern, my father said. No one questions concerned parents. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God." The recording stopped. Not abruptly, just cleanly. Silence rushed in. I became aware of my own heartbeat in my ears. My hands were cold despite the warm room. For a split second, I wanted the floor to open beneath me, not because of Daniel, not because of the guests, because of them. My parents. My mother stood first. "This is inappropriate," she said sharply, her composure cracking for the first time all day. "Turn that off." "It's already off," Daniel replied calmly. My father pushed his chair back slowly. "You had no right." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't look triumphant. "I didn't record it," he said evenly. "But when it was brought to me, I felt my wife deserved the truth."
Not threats.
Not warnings. I turned toward my parents. My mother's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something flicker there. Not regret. Not apology. Exposure. "You are going to humiliate him," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake the way I expected it to. "We were protecting you," she insisted. "From what?" I asked. "From loving someone you don't approve of?" My father looked around the room, suddenly aware of every pair of eyes watching him. "This conversation was private," he said through clenched teeth. "And this is my marriage," Daniel replied. That was it. No shouting. No dramatic accusations. Just truth sitting in the middle of the room, like something undeniable. My mother grabbed her purse. The scrape of her chair against the floor echoed louder than it should have. "We're leaving," she said stiffly. My father didn't argue. They walked toward the exit together, black fabric cutting through soft gold light, guests parting instinctively to let them pass. No one stopped them. No one said a word. The doors at the back of the hall opened, then closed. And for the first time all day, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt honest. The doors closed with a heavy, final sound. Not dramatic. Not slammed. Just finished. For a moment, no one moved. The DJ stood frozen behind his booth. My maid of honor had one hand pressed to her mouth. Daniel was still holding the microphone, though he wasn't speaking anymore. I was aware of everything and nothing at the same time. The air conditioning humming. A fork clattering onto a plate somewhere near the back. My own breathing slow, deliberate. I stared at the doors long after my parents disappeared behind them. Black fabric. Straight backs. No turning around. They hadn't looked at me again. I don't know what I expected in that final second. A pause. A hesitation. Some flicker of reconsideration. There wasn't one. The silence stretched, thick, but not chaotic. Not explosive. Just stunned. Daniel lowered the microphone carefully onto the table instead of handing it back to the DJ. That detail stuck with me, the care in it. No flourish. No satisfaction. He turned to me, not to the guests, not to the room.
To me.
His voice, when he spoke, was quiet enough that only I could hear. "I'm sorry it had to happen like that." I searched his face for triumph, for anger, for any sign that this had been about revenge. There was none. "You knew," I said softly. It wasn't an accusation, just a realization. "I suspected," he replied. I hoped I was wrong. A few guests began to shift in their seats. The room was starting to come back to life in small, uncertain movements. Someone cleared their throat. A glass was lifted and set down again. My aunt approached cautiously, placing a gentle hand on my arm. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "are you okay?" That question landed harder than everything else. Was I okay? I felt exposed, but not humiliated. Shaken, but not destroyed. Underneath the shock, beneath the embarrassment and the ache pressing into my ribs, there was something unexpected rising up. Relief. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated their disapproval in my head. I hadn't been overly sensitive. It had been real. And now everyone knew it. Daniel slipped his hand into mine, not gripping tightly, just there.
Solid. Warm.
"I won't say anything else," he murmured. "This is your moment." My moment. I looked around the room at the people who had shown up for us. His parents, who looked stunned but steady. My friends, whose expressions held more protectiveness than pity. No one was laughing. No one looked entertained. They looked supportive. The DJ finally spoke, voice careful. "Would you like some music?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Yes," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt.
Yes.
"Please." Soft music began to fill the space. Not celebratory, not loud. Just something gentle enough to break the silence, without pretending it hadn't existed. I didn't chase after my parents. I didn't step outside. For the first time in my life, I didn't run after their approval as it walked away from me. I stood exactly where I was.
Married.
Exposed. And strangely, undeniably free. The music helped. Not because it erased what happened, but because it gave everyone something to do with their hands. Glasses were lifted. Napkins were adjusted. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people shifted back into their seats. Conversation returned in careful layers, like ice forming over water that had just been disturbed. I stayed where I was for a few seconds longer, letting the reality settle. They were gone. No dramatic confrontation in the parking lot. No last-minute reconciliation. No whispered apology. Just absence. Daniel's parents approached first. His mother's eyes were damp, but steady. "I'm so sorry," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt real and unscripted. "You didn't deserve that." I nodded against her shoulder, surprised at how grounding the contact felt. His father gave Daniel a firm handshake that turned into a brief embrace. "You handled that with dignity," he said quietly.
Dignity.
That word wrapped around me in a way I hadn't expected. A few more guests came by, not to gossip, not to ask for details. Just small reassurances. "We're here. We support you. You two are solid." No one asked for the recording again. No one needed clarification. It was simple. They had heard enough. Daniel guided me gently toward the sweetheart table and pulled out my chair. The gesture was ordinary, almost boring, and that normalcy steadied me more than anything else. I sat down slowly, smoothing my dress across my lap. "I didn't want to blindside you," he said quietly once we were alone at the table. "You didn't," I replied. He looked at me carefully. "I found out about the recording a week ago." My heart skipped. A week. One of their friends thought I should know. They felt uncomfortable with the plan. I let that sink in. A plan. Not an emotional outburst. Not a spur-of-the-moment objection. Something deliberate. "I kept thinking they'd change their minds," he continued. "That maybe once they saw how happy you were, it wouldn't matter." I stared at my hands. I kept thinking that too. We sat in silence for a moment, not tense. Just honest. Across the room, my maid of honor had started a quiet conversation near the dance floor, subtly encouraging people to stand. The DJ adjusted the volume slightly higher. Life was nudging its way back in. "I feel strange," I admitted. "Strange how?" "Like I'm grieving something I should have stopped hoping for a long time ago." Daniel didn't try to fix that. He didn't rush to fill the space. He just reached across the table and took my hand, You don't have to decide anything about them tonight, he said. Tonight is about us.
Us.
I looked around the room again, really looked this time. His cousin laughing softly. My friend adjusting the cake display. Two of his students' parents waving shyly from a table in the back. The world hadn't collapsed. The sky hadn't fallen because my parents left. If anything, the room felt clearer, lighter. For the first time that day, I wasn't bracing for the next comment, the next warning, the next subtle cut. They weren't here to deliver it. I squeezed Daniel's hand. I'm not embarrassed, I said slowly, realizing it as I spoke. I thought I would be, but I'm not. He smiled faintly. Good. I'm sad, I added, but not ashamed. That felt important. Sadness was honest. Shame was inherited. And as the first couple stepped onto the dance floor, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to before. The worst thing they could have done had already happened, and I was still standing. I slipped outside just before sunset. Not to chase them, not to call,
just to breathe.
The venue overlooked a stretch of open field, tall grass moving gently in the evening wind. The sky was turning that soft in-between color, blue fading into gold. The air felt cooler against my skin, calming the heat that had been sitting in my chest all afternoon. I lifted the hem of my dress slightly and walked toward the edge of the patio. For years, I had imagined my wedding day ending with my parents hugging me tightly, my mother adjusting my veil one last time, my father telling Daniel to take care of me in that awkward, emotional way men sometimes do when they don't know how to say, I love you. Instead, I had watched them walk away. I leaned my hands against the railing and let the truth settle fully. They hadn't left because they were shocked. They hadn't left because they were hurt. They left because they were exposed. And for the first time in my life, I hadn't rushed after them to smooth it over. I thought about all the years I'd tried to manage their reactions, choosing safer words, softer opinions, delayed decisions. I had built entire versions of myself designed to reduce conflict. Daniel had never asked me to do that. He had never reshaped me to make himself more comfortable. The difference felt almost startling now. I heard the patio door open behind me. I didn't turn right away. I knew who it was. Daniel stepped beside me quietly. You disappear often? He asked gently. Only on important days. He nodded like that made sense. For a minute, we just stood there, watching the sky change colors. Are you thinking about them? He asked. Yes. He didn't tell me not to. I kept hoping, I admitted, that maybe today would be different. That maybe they'd see us, and something would shift. And if it doesn't, he asked softly. I let out a slow breath. Then I stopped waiting for it to. That sentence felt heavier than my dress, but steadier. He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. You don't have to cut them off tonight, he said. You don't have to decide anything while you're emotional. I know. And I did. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making declarations. It was about something quieter. Ownership. For years, I had confused obedience with love, approval with safety, silence with peace. But standing there in the fading light, I realized something simple and unmovable. Love doesn't require shrinking. It doesn't require strategic self-editing. It doesn't threaten exposure to maintain control. I turned to Daniel fully then, studying his face in the soft evening glow. You didn't do that to hurt them, I said.
No.
You did it so I wouldn't walk into this blind. Yes. There was no pride in his answer, just honesty. Inside, I could hear laughter rising again, tentative at first, then warmer. The music had shifted to something lighter. Life continuing. I squeezed his hand. I'm not going after them, I said quietly. He nodded once. I didn't think you would. We stood there a moment longer, letting the last of the sun slip below the horizon. Then I gathered the fabric of my dress and turned back toward the doors. Not toward the parking lot. Not toward the past. Toward the room where my husband was waiting to dance with me. By the time we re-entered the reception hall, the energy had shifted. It wasn't loud or wild. It wasn't the kind of celebration you see in movies where everyone forgets what just happened. It was steadier than that.
Real.
My maid of honor caught my eye from across the dance floor and gave me a small, encouraging nod. Daniel's parents were swaying together near the edge of the crowd. A few friends had already started dancing, deliberately normal, deliberately warm. The DJ transitioned into a slower song. Daniel held out his hand to me, without saying anything. I took it. We stepped onto the dance floor, not because it was scheduled, not because it was expected, but because it felt right to reclaim something. His hand rested gently at my waist. Mine settled against his shoulder. We began to move, simple and unpolished, like two people in a living room instead of in front of 100 witnesses. "Are you tired?" he asked quietly. "A little," I admitted, "but not in the way I thought I'd be." He smiled faintly. "Good." I rested my head briefly against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and unhurried. The same rhythm I'd fallen asleep to countless times before. Around us, conversation picked up again. Laughter returned. Not forced, not overly loud. Just human. No one mentioned my parents. No one treated us like something fragile. And slowly, something unexpected happened. I stopped scanning the room for them. All evening, even after they'd left, some part of me had been searching automatically, like muscle memory. Looking for my mother's expression. Checking my father's posture. Anticipating a disapproving glance. But they weren't there. And nothing terrible happened because of it. As the song ended, Daniel pressed a soft kiss to my temple. "You okay?" he asked again. I looked up at him. Yes. This time it wasn't a reflex. It was true. Later that night, after the cake was cut and the last of the guests had begun to drift toward the exits, I stood alone for a moment near the center of the room. Half-empty glasses. Wilted petals on the tables. The faint hum of cleanup beginning in the background. It hadn't been the wedding I imagined as a child. There had been no cinematic reconciliation. No last-minute blessing. No tearful speech from my father. But there had been something better.
Clarity.
My parents wore black to my wedding like they were attending a funeral. Maybe, in a way, they were. The end of control. The end of quiet intimidation. The end of my need to earn permission to live my own life. I didn't hate them. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grown. Some relationships survive on proximity and pressure. Others survive on respect. That night, I understood the difference. Daniel came up behind me and wrapped his arms gently around my waist. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Home. The word felt different now. "Yes," I said softly. And as we walked out together, not chasing anyone, not proving anything, I realized something simple. Some people walked out of my wedding in black. But I walked out in white. And for the first time, it felt like my choice. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your future? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to American Granny Stories, where we explore real, grounded, emotionally honest life moments together. Let's build a community where truth doesn't have to whisper.